All right, and welcome everyone to the new season of the Career Climb. We took a brief hiatus, but we're back with a new season here in 2025. If you're not familiar with the Career Climb, this is where we spark conversations with executives and industry leaders, and they share their perspective on leadership and workplace culture. And this season, we're taking a unique spin on how we approach interviews, and we're going to do a real time case study. And honestly, I can't wait for you to meet tonight's special guest, Kelsea Warren, and she's going to dig into this case with me. I had a chance to meet her online, so excited for us to talk tonight. But if this is your first time tuning in and seeing my face, I am your host, Julia Rock, founder and CEO at Rock Career Development. And we're a Houston based consulting firm that's focused on reducing turnover through leadership transformation. And so I'm excited for you to be in the building with us tonight. But if you want to catch up on past seasons of the Career Climb, you can connect with me here on LinkedIn or visit rockcareer.com/CC archive, and you can view our YouTube playlist. And the last thing, I hope that you are not going to just sit and watch tonight. I would love for you to get active in the chat with us, follow along, let us know where you're watching from, let us know what parts of the conversation and the case study are resonating with you. The idea is for this to be interactive. But enough preamble. Let's go ahead and have this conversation because I can't wait for you to meet tonight's special guest, Kelsea Warren, as we dig into how great leaders tackle burnout. So tonight we're talking about burnout, y'all. So Kelsea, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm so glad you're here because, like I said, we met on was it Threads?
Yeah.
It was Threads. I mean, I feel like Threads is such a great platform. So really glad that we have been able to meet. And so let's go ahead and first, before we get into anything, I'd like for the viewers to get to know you a little bit. So would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah. Welcome to the show. I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much, Julia, for having me. Like she said, my name is Kelsea Warren. I'm a workplace well-being coach and consultant. I'm also a former therapist. So I work directly with one-on-one individuals, helping them to prevent and recover from burnout and do some career clarity work, specifically around workplace values. And then I also do speaking workshops and consulting for organizations. So when we chatted, we talked about how we both kind of have two arms to the work we do. And I think it's important because it's holistic. And so I'm really excited as we talk more about this case study to look at it from a few different angles. And doing embedded burnout coaching in organizations is one of my favorite things to do with the organizations itself. So I am excited to be here. On the side note, you could probably hear I'm recovering from the flu. So sorry if I have to take a few breaks here and there. I promise I feel fine. It's just lingering. So I have a daughter and she's 5. Now here it goes. And then I also have one on the way. So
yes. Oh, I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited for you. Yes, we did have the chance to talk a little bit about the little one that's on the way. So excited for you. And so let's go ahead and start the conversation. Really want to dig into, why do you think burnout is such an important conversation? Think about where we are in 2025. Like, why do you think it's such an important conversation?
I think the prevalence is, hang on one second.
No problem. We're gonna work through it.
I'm like, okay, I've been talking all day and then it picks now to go. So the prevalence is definitely something to take note of. I think the last statistic from the Gallup workplace poll said 75% of the workforce has experienced burnout at some point. So it's something that we are all touched by, if not have already experienced. So I think that makes it an important conversation. But I also think the way that organizations and leaders approach burnout with this I-frame approach, putting it back on the individual, it's their fault type of thought process is really a struggle because we know that it's a systemic, we need to take an organizational S-frame approach when we are managing burnout. And until we get to the root of that disconnect, it's going to continue happening. And we know that the long-term consequences of burnout not only just in the work life, but also on through medical and relational impacts is huge. So I think it's a very needed discussion, and I'm excited that we're talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that that's the thing, right? The idea that it's just the employee's fault, right? That it's like they just have to figure out how to manage their lives better or manage their workloads better. And I think we lose the idea that it's an organizational and leadership challenge as well. And so to that end, I'd like to ask you, what do you think is a conversation that we're not having about burnout? I think there's some things that you already can kind of Google, but what do you think we're not talking about? Or what do you think are some underlying things that maybe leaders should know when it
Yeah.
comes to burnout?
When I think just because of my work previously as a therapist and clinician, I think the differences between someone's personal mental health struggles or stressors and burnout, they're often conflated. And I think that's just a missed part of the conversation when we talk about workplace wellness or workplace well-being. It is so focused on mental health, and burnout kind of gets wrapped up in that. And a lot of people don't even know that burnout is not in the DSM. It is not a mental health disorder. It's neither also a medical condition. It's characterized by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon, because when the stressors at work are eliminated or the demands are met with resources that are appropriate, eventually your symptoms do dissolve. So although it feels a lot like things like anxiety or depression, they're not the same. And I think that a lot of people are just really unaware of that, especially leadership, just in general. They don't understand the difference. And I think that that's something, I know we'll get to this at the end, like things that we can do to equip ourselves is learning about what burnout actually is, just from an educational standpoint, is going to be so helpful in moving forward.
I love that, because to your point, it's something that can be addressed, right? You know, especially in the workplace. It's different to your point, like the other mental health challenges that may require other levels of intervention or support, medication, whatever it might be. You know, something like burnout is truly preventable, and there are ways to take action. So I'm excited to get into the case study, but before we do that, I've got to pick your brain a little bit, or just ask you about your personal
Yeah.
experience. So when you look back on your career, you know, is there a particular situation that you've had with burnout that you'd like to share with the viewers?
Yeah, I have quite a few. So I know it would take probably the whole time to explain all of them. I'm kind of like a cyclical burnout, traditional high achiever. So sometimes I'm getting myself into those situations. Sometimes I find myself in those situations. But I think the reason that I speak heavily to that disconnect is one of the times that stands out most prevalent to me is a circumstance when I did have work stressors that were heightened. I was in a crisis role as a victim advocate, a social worker. There was a lot of turnover at the workplace. I loved my job, so I thought it couldn't possibly be burnout. I had some personal things going on as well, a deployed husband and some other fun things. But in that, I felt myself like losing my spark, slipping away, calling out sick a ton, like more than I felt like was appropriate, especially because I was the only victim advocate. I was the one deep role, 24/7 response. Like I couldn't, if I didn't show up, those people didn't get the help. And so that kind of compounded the guilt a bit. And I started experiencing more physical symptoms, headaches, like just sitting down to work felt really difficult, even to send an email. It was like an aversion to it. I had no idea what was going on. And me here getting my MSW, and I worked in a mental health clinic surrounded by clinicians that I love, by the way, and was prescribed medication for depression because I thought that's what was going on. And I actually almost admitted myself into the hospital because of the symptoms from that medication. I actually had serotonin syndrome because I wasn't depressed. I was stressed. And now I know that, and it's really eye-opening to know, like, I was surrounded by mental health professionals who were trying to help me, but they themselves couldn't pinpoint it as burnout either. And I only can, looking back and now knowing what I know about it. And of course, if you need to seek therapy, take medication, like by all means, please do that. But in my circumstance, it truly was work that was the issue. And when those different things got alleviated in my role, I ended up leaving only because we had to move for the military, but I eventually like re-engaged and loved work again in that same role. So I think it stands out to me as one where I wanted to do a good job. I liked the job that I was in, but there were work stressors that I couldn't identify in the moment that were creating some misalignment for me.
And I love the fact that you were able to really like to kind of look back now in hindsight and see, hey, this was not just your garden variety issue. This was truly burnout. And like you said, it wasn't depression, right? So you're taking the medication, and sometimes, like, especially if you're a high performer, if you find yourself like you said, calling out sick and having these different issues, you may feel like, it's like, am I depressed? Is something wrong with me? Is something going on? Like, what's happening here? And so the truth is, it's just that you're burnt out, right? And so thank you for sharing that situation with us. So now let's go ahead and hop into tonight's conversation. So for those of you that are viewing, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be talking about a real life case study, something that has actually happened. We're going to be having a real conversation. So I'm going to set the tone for them, Kelsey, as to the case, and then we'll get into it. So for those of you that are listening, the case that we're dealing with is that there was a financial analyst, a senior financial analyst. We're going to call her Pat for the sake of the story. The names and situations have been changed. But Pat was a financial analyst, and she was really strong in her role. She was handling high pressure things. She's been a consistent top performer. But over the past, say, 6 months, her leadership has relied heavily on her due to management changes, software implementation, job restructuring. So she was getting covered with a lot of work, or being asked to do a lot of work. And over that 6 months, it just continued to be intensified. And so what happened to Pat is that even though she was always an engaged employee, her behavior started to shift as she went through those 6 months. So she was still delivering and meeting the needs overall for her internal customers, but she started asking for more time off, and she started to pull back from certain meetings and engagements with the team. And so the question may come up like, well, did she mention anything to her manager? So she mentioned her overload in passing to her prior manager, but they never really had a deep discussion about it or as to her concerns and what may need to change. And so finally, she set up a meeting with her newest boss. So her old manager left, and she had a new boss, and that boss was in the role for a total of 45 days. And her new boss, Jennifer, she tells her, hey, I've decided to quit. So Pat was doing her job. She was doing all the things, but then she started to pull back, asked for time off. And then ultimately she went to her new boss and said, I want some time off. And Jennifer, who's new in the role, she's wondering, as a leader, is there something else she could have done to stop Pat from leaving? And now she's questioning her own leadership ability. And as I said, this is a real life case that's coming from a client situation. And so to get us started, Kelsey, around this, I would like to ask you, what would you say, based on what you've heard so far, what would you say are the key signs that Pat is experiencing burnout rather than a temporary slump? Because sometimes those two things get conflated, right? It's like, oh, the person is they're just going through a moment versus, hey, we're getting to burnout now.
Yeah. And I know it doesn't say in here it says over the past 6 months, I guess this has been happening. But when I like to look at things, I like to look at circumstances, like changes in circumstance, and then kind of take more of that holistic approach, looking at Pat herself, the role, and the work environment separately to see what stressors are showing up. So again, key, I have it pulled up over here too. So I'm cheating and I can read it. So for all of you, but over the past 6 months, so when we look at burnout, just in general, we know that it's chronic stress over time in the role or work environment. So this hasn't been happening for just a week. It's not just one project. You mentioned job restructuring. So her role has changed a little bit. New software implementation, again, is that necessary in this moment when there's also changing in management in the work environment? So additional duties being taken on. And then her personally, she is a high performer. She is going to go above and beyond. She's been engaged and then now she's pulling away. So I even mentioned that was, something. So the absenteeism, calling out sick, presenteeism, showing up and, not feeling as motivated as you once were. To me, there's red flags all over this. But for someone that is like, I'm not sure, it just seems maybe she's going through something. And again, knowing the difference between like a personal life stressor and a work and having that connection is something that's important to identify. But to me, it stands out that there's been massive changes in the role, the work environment, and then for her, for someone that was previously engaged, kind of stop showing up in meetings as much, or trying to, in this case, it's not just a boundary setting. It is more so, I'm doing this because I am actually disengaging from work, quiet quitting, if you will. So the high workload, the changes in the role and work environment, along with the changes in personal, are red flags to me for sure.
And I love how you broke that down, because it's not always just the work that could be happening that's an issue, right? It's also the fact that you have personal things maybe going on at home. There's always something that could be compounding it, and also the fact that this is not just a one-off, right? This is chronic. Months of things going on, months of the impacts of the job restructurings and other things happening. And I think for those who are listening that are leaders and are thinking about what's happening on your teams, thinking about, hey, have we had these kind of restructurings? Have we had these kind of implementations? Have we had these things that are bearing down on our team? And we think that the team is just kind of rolling along. Meanwhile, they're stressed out, and they have been for months, but maybe they haven't fully verbalized that. So I love that perspective. And so, knowing what we know, the fact that Pat really didn't talk to her former boss about it, and then she had the new boss Jennifer that came in. Is there anything that Jennifer, poor soul, 45 days in the job, is there anything that you think that Jennifer could have done differently to maybe try to keep Pat in the organization? Again, she didn't have a lot of runtime with her.
Yeah. And 45 days is not a lot. You're barely, if you have a 30, 60, 90 to like on board, you're barely out of the 30, which is a lot of observation in most roles. However, I do think if this is the first time she's talking to Pat about this, 45 days is still kind of a long time to make connections with your team as a leader. And we may have differing, thoughts and opinions about that, but to me, it's a priority to get to know from the inside out what is going on with your team and where they're standing. Just, hey, how's the role going? How do you feel the work environment's going at the moment? In the first few weeks, I think would have been an important step to maybe start the conversation. Could she have changed the fact that Pat was in burnout already? No, because it was happening chronically over the last 6 months. So she's definitely in a tough spot. I know she's questioning her abilities at this point. I wouldn't blame her by any means. But then I do go back to the part where she mentioned it briefly to a prior manager. And I can't help but wonder if culturally it's just kind of, yeah, we're all stressed, and it wasn't taken as seriously as it could have been.
And you made such a great point there around getting to know your people, right? So when you come into a leadership role and you have a team, it's so important for you to get to know what's happening, because you may hear from the prior manager for someone else like, oh, well, Kelsey, she's a strong performer. She's got it. She knows everything. And those are the people that don't get paid attention to, because they're just kind of off to the races. It's the squeaky wheels that get the grease, right? And so you have a strong performer like Pat, who may not have been saying that much, but she's struggling. And so it's on leaders to take the time, even if you're new in the job, to figure out, okay, what's happening with my team, getting to know what they're working on, understanding what pain points they may have, because like you said, 45 days is not a lot of time, but it's still several weeks of you being there. And as a leader, your goal is to prioritize the people that work for you and making sure they have what they need. And so perhaps she couldn't have changed anything like to stop her from leaving, but perhaps she could have had some insight, some more perspective, try to remove some obstacle. Maybe she could have delayed the turnover a little bit, had she maybe done a additional due diligence. So not putting the blame fully on Jennifer at all in this case at all. And that was a conversation with the client. It's like, don't blame yourself for this, but there is an opportunity to reflect. We do have some folks that are active in the chat. Thank you so much, Dan and Kristen, Christy, Jason, Holly, and Tara. Thank you so much. And one of the comments here that I wanted to highlight was the one from Tara. Breaking it down by looking at the individual, the role, and the work environment is such a great way to dissect a holistic issue at hand and get a full picture of all the stressors. And that really goes back to the point that you were making, Kelsey, that burnout is not just coming from what am I doing every day at work. There's so many different things that could be impacting that individual. And if the leader is taking the time to get to know that person, they may get some insight as to what else is happening just besides the work. So Thank you so much, Tara, for that. So now let's get into, so Jennifer has already lost Pat here. Jennifer is doing the offboarding for Pat. But what do you think are immediate steps that Jennifer could take to manage the workload and stress for the rest of her team without compromising business needs? And then we'll talk about leadership more generally after that. But what can Jennifer do right now for the folks who are left?
Yeah, I think just going off of what we said previously, continuing the connections. If I were in Jennifer's position, I would be having meetings with everyone else right away and using kind of that same framework. What's going on with you? I'd love to get to know you better. How do you know? And helping them almost identify when they're stressed. A lot of people have never been asked that question at work. This is something that was asked of me in one of my, back when I was a therapist. My manager asked me that, and it was a question on the intake form when we first started meeting. How will I know that you're stressed?
Wow.
And I had to think about it for a second. And then I told her, I will probably stop doing my hair. Like, I'll just throw it up, in a bun and come to work, and like, it's okay still. But I think that is something like, or I'll cry, when you start talking to me. And I had to really think about it. But when I was thinking back about all those previous burnout cycles, that was like one of the first things to go on the personal side. So getting to know people in that way, I think, is going to be a good thing for Jennifer. I think also helping them identify what the stressors are in their actual job and in the work environment, not through event session, but more actual things. And we call it job crafting. So letting them take ownership over the things that they have control to change in the role in the work environment, but being able to identify very specific stressors. So for example, she had job restructurings. What about the restructure was creating a misalignment or friction for her? Same thing with the new software implementation. How much time is it taking? Can you collaborate with other people? Are you delegating? This is something that I call the productivity tax for high performers. So when you do more or you do good work, you get more work.
Yes. That's the reward. That's the payment, is more work.
Always a fun thing. But helping them get really specific about the stressor. So instead of just saying I'm stressed or I feel overwhelmed, getting very clear. And I think that helping them and having that conversation then opens the door for, okay, we have these demands. What resources can I as a manager provide, if I can provide any? Or are there roadblocks that, just seeing me on an email can help you get somewhere quicker? Do I need to go talk to someone in management with you or facilitate a conversation? Those kind of questions are really helpful in letting the people on your team know that you're in their corner, but still empowering them that they also have changes in the role and the work environment that they can address as an employee too.
And I think that that last part really talks about how the leaders can proactively prevent the burnout, right? Like, how can I get involved as a leader to support you, right? Sometimes leaders feel like, hey, I have to be hands on with everything in order to prevent burnout, and it's like it doesn't have to be that. It may just be that you get CC'd on the email. Or perhaps you just step in on a conversation. I can't tell you how many requests when I was in my corporate career, how many requests I was able to stop coming to my team by me just joining the call and asking, well, why do we need this? What's it for? Is there someone else that can do this, or are there other kind of resources already available
Yeah.
to provide you with what you need, so we don't have to add this additional tasks? And so for those of you that are listening, if you're thinking about how can I proactively prevent burnout on my team, it's things like that. You don't have to micromanage, but it's more so just making sure that you're stepping in and letting your team know that that you have their back and you're willing to remove obstacles. And can we just get on a soapbox for a second,
Please.
Kelsea, around the let's try to do everything. And we were talking about this in the green room, like trying to do everything but like solve the issue, right? Like with whether it's, the 18th wellness program that you have to do during lunch. What are your thoughts on some of these some of these additional programs that kind of get thrown in when it's like we're already stressed, I don't have any bandwidth?
Yeah.
Just want to understand your thoughts on some, because some of the leaders who may be listening may be thinking, well, maybe we need another wellness program. So just want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think anytime we are trying to throw band-aid solutions at the symptoms versus addressing the root cause, it's not going to be very successful. And I think it was Forbes who just like recently posted an article about the failure of workplace wellness programs in general. Not that they're not great, not that we shouldn't be offering them, but we're spending billions of dollars on them and they're just not very effective, either because we don't have time to implement them anyway, or we're saying it's not working as employees because there's still that you're going back to the same stressor every day. Sunday scaries are still going to come around, even if you go to Pilates on Friday. So it's difficult conversation, I think, to hold and to have. But to your point, like things like asking why, kind of being that buffer, and high performers, especially more prone to burnout, but they want to show up and they want to do good work. They need help in removing things like barriers and roadblocks, giving back some of that autonomy so they can make their own decisions so that they can do the work. And I think one of the hardest things about burnout is that reduced efficacy, feeling like you're not able to do the work or the output that you once were. And of course, that means sometimes setting boundaries and doing other things. But I think as a manager, like you said, it doesn't mean pulling in and taking away their work or stepping in and trying to help them with every little thing. It's kind of having a collaborative approach and asking, how can I support you in a way that is not just mindfulness apps or putting it back on them and from a mental health perspective, but more so in the role and work environment? How can I support you?
I love that, and so I want to take that conversation now even up a little bit higher and speak about your work in organizations and just ask the question, what role does kind of senior and executive management, so thinking C-suite, VP, what role do they play in supporting their leaders in preventing burnout on their teams? What have you been able to see with your clients and organizations?
I think they have probably the largest role because they need to, first of all, be modeling what healthy boundaries in work life looks like. But I also think it is their responsibility to communicate with transparency, to give the employees the why behind. So you mentioned the why a lot, and like, why do we need this? Where is this coming from? And I think it all starts, if we're going to go really big, back to the strategic plan of the organization. If you don't have one, you should have one, or you probably have one that you don't even know about. But even passing that little pieces of information down to employees helps give them meaning, purpose, and an understanding that I'm not just doing this new software implementation because they said it's a good idea. This has been in the pipeline for a long time, and it's going to solve XYZ issues, and we expect it to be ending around this time. Those little pieces of information help give, especially your high performers that want to be involved in the work and see purpose in it, kind of that connection that helps them see, okay, it at least makes sense why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So transparency and communication, especially about strategic planning or just goal setting in general in an organization, is huge. I think when I come into organizations that allow me to audit current systems and processes, so kind of think about it in the P's, like people, process, profit, product if needed, and kind of in all areas, especially through the employee life cycle or experience, like are the company's values aligning with what they're actually doing? Or do they have these values operationalized in organizations? And so that is my primary lens when I do consulting that I help organizations with, is help them with the operationalizing of values. And it looks like going through all these processes, and you say that you value creativity and that's on your website and it's in your handbook. How are you uplifting your creative employees? How are you taking a creative approach to onboarding and training? And so just making sure that you're kind of walking the walk as leaders, especially as a broader organization and in the executive level, is going to be important, because employees are very smart and they will know when other people are treated differently than them, or they are not kind of going by, the company says they value these things, yet, they may value efficiency is a huge one that I see that it's a misalignment. Yet all the processes and systems are not followed, not up to date, not tracked anywhere, and that doesn't feel efficient. So for an employee that values efficiency, that's creating a different kind of stress and friction that can also cause burnout.
Man, there's just so much that you said there that is just so rich. And I'm going to pick out a couple of things though. But the idea of walking the walk, right? So, your employees can pick up when you're saying one thing and doing another, right? And so you're saying, oh, well, we're creative and we're flexible and we're doing all the things. It's wonderful. And then your employees are looking around like, are we sure? Because that's just what it says on the website, but I don't feel this every day. And so I love the idea of walking the walk and making sure that what you're saying aligns with, with what you're actually doing, right? And then one of the things that you mentioned was around the strategic plan and purpose and vision, because if you have those things in place, then the work can be aligned with that. So anything that's outside of that, you're able to see, okay, maybe we don't need to do this necessarily. If it's truly not aligned with our goals at all, why are we doing it? And then the employees can also feel like, hey, I have a purpose. And so I love the fact that you go into your organizations as well, and you're looking at the process, the people, and how all those things fit together. Because I think sometimes people look at them in isolation, right? Like, is it just a process issue? Is it just a people issue? But I love that you're taking that holistic approach to see, okay, where are we? And how, are things misaligned, or are they all together? So I love that. And I got another comment here from Tara. We're going to put you back on the screen here, Tara. To Kelsey's point, it is the responsibility of executive leadership to lead the organization in a way that is people-centered and profit-driven, not choosing one over the other. Genuine care for the people at the heart of your organization will amplify your organization's success. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Kelsey, around, the idea that you don't have to necessarily pick one or the other. I feel like organizations feel like, hey, it's just revenue, profit, dollars and cents at the expense of people. But I feel like if you do one, like help serving your people, that the other piece on profitability comes. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I don't know why that's such a disconnect still, when there's so much research, like hordes of research that says when you have happy, productive employees, not only are they going to perform better, but they're also going to stay longer. You won't see the things like absenteeism, presenteeism. So that impacts the bottom line as well. So when you do take care of your people in a way that's not just promotions, benefits, salary, but the holistic approach and planning appropriately for team size and capacity, like you mentioned, then the business is going to thrive because you have people supporting it. And then on the back end, when you're only focusing on profit, you're losing people left and right, and that costs money.
We're coming up on time here. I want to be respectful of your time. So I do have one other question to ask you though, because there may be leaders listening who are just like, well, you guys are talking about the burnout when it comes to the employees and making sure the employees are happy. What about me as a leader? So do you have any thoughts as to how these leaders can prevent burnout for themselves as well? Because they're trying to manage all the things.
Yeah, it's a tough place. You're kind of caught in the middle, and you are doing a lot of advocating for your team. But I think advocating for yourself is also going to be important. So kind of back to when that person asked me, how will I know you're stressed? I was in a clinical supervisor role. I think asking yourself that question as a leader is always going to be a good thing. Knowing what your boundaries and limitations are is going to be a good thing. But then taking yourself through the same process that you take your employees through with that job crafting lens is also helpful. What's in your role? Do you have control to change? There's demands. Is it something that you need a resource for that can be removed, delegated, offloaded to someone else? Do you need to collaborate more? Asking those questions often, which requires, regular reflection and check-in. We're always taking care of everyone else in our one-on-ones, but we should really also, as leaders, be having one-on-ones with ourselves at least weekly, in my opinion. Same thing with the work environment as well. You're going to be privy to more information, sometimes too much, like some stuff you don't want to hear. So it's important to maintain boundaries around the people that you're communicating with, the information that you're receiving, and even your physical workspace, taking note of that. If I am in the office, is the office a good place for me to work? Do I need to switch it up sometime and go to a coffee shop or a conference room, kind of get out of my element? Those kind of questions, figuring out, not just on the personal side. Of course, we need to be hydrating, sleeping, taking care of ourselves, doing all those things. But at work specifically, you can't pour from an empty cup. I know it's cliche, but it is the truth. But I do think as a leader, if you start doing those things for yourself, that internal reflection, the identifying of work stressors, and then addressing them directly, it's going to help you also do that for other people, get really, really good at it. It's like a muscle that you can build, and change will come pretty quickly after that.
So let me just shake the table a little bit. Let me shake the table a little bit before we wrap up. So there may be leaders who are listening and they're wondering, is it okay to show a certain level of vulnerability with your team, right? You can try to set boundaries, but what are your thoughts on like just being vulnerable with the team, saying, hey, this is where I'm at right now. I need space, I need breathing room, I need something, whatever it might be. What are your thoughts on showing vulnerability with your team? Because many people think vulnerability is a sign of weakness.
That's such a hard question, I think, because it depends on like the content of the information. Is it about you? Is it about, the workplace in general? It's always, especially as a new leader, like you get information from the top, knowing what that you share down below is like such a gray area. But for you personally, my best advice for this is to go back to your workplace values. So making sure that you're in alignment there. If you value transparency, authenticity, collaboration, generosity, care, community, those kind of things, it can be a bit of a misalignment for you to try and put up a front and not share some of those things. And those kind of misalignments also create burnout. If you feel like you're not able to show up, in the authentic way. Of course, you do have to have a kind of a pulse on who to share and what to share, with your team, not to overburden them as well. But I do think if you kind of come back to your own value system, are operating within that, it should show you, the way as far as how much and when to share.
I love that so much because I don't think we talk about the misalignment, with how you show up and that being a source of burnout. If you are someone who typically likes to share and be open and you're trying to, just walk the company line or put up a front, that can just be exhausting. And so it's not even the work that's burning you out. It's just this mask that you have to wear every day. So I truly, truly love that perspective. And so I'm excited about this conversation that we've had tonight. This was such a rich discussion, Kelsey. So to wrap things up for those who are viewing this, the leaders who have to go back to their office tomorrow, what is one thing you'd want to share, one last thing you'd want to share on burnout for them?
I think kind of just what you just said, something that is, the heart of my research, for my PhD is workplace value alignment. And so that is not the company values, that is not your personal values, that is your values as an employee at work. So what you find meaningful and motivating, a lot of people have no idea that value misalignment alone, even if we didn't have restructurings or additional workload issues or changing management, can create burnout. So even if you love your job, if things are going well, if you have value misalignments, say the efficiency example I gave, it kind of creates this friction in the back of your brain that is hard to pinpoint. And so getting really clear on your workplace values, asking those questions, how do I approach work? What's important to me at work? What frustrates me more than other people when I see it going on? Other people are like, oh, that's no big deal. And you're like, can't stop thinking about it. Those are some signs that you may have some value misalignments. They're a little more sneaky and difficult to adjust or change, but it can help you understand why you may be feeling that way. Back to what you said at the beginning, there's nothing wrong with you. Burnout is something that's very common. And I think the more we educate on ourselves, the different aspects of workload, reward, value misalignments, we can better understand how we can help ourselves, because there are people like us out there doing the work to help. But for now, we also need all help, all hands on deck to solve this problem. So
all hands on deck. That's a word there. So thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much for being here. If the folks who are listening, they want to keep in touch with you because they're dealing with burnout themselves or on their teams and within their organizations, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, tagged here. I'm not as active on LinkedIn actually as I am on Instagram. So create a lot of content around burnout and workplace values on Reels. And so I'm at the Seamless Coach there, pretty much the TikTok, website, Threads, as we mentioned at the beginning. So that is kind of my handle on all of the things. I would love to continue the conversation. If you would like to have a few free resources for Julia's audience, if you send me a message, happy to give you some of those audits that we talked about with you, your role, your work environment. So please reach out if you do have any questions. Thank you so much, Julia, and for bearing with the intermittent voice, everyone. Sorry about that.
No, no, we are just grateful for your wisdom this evening and knowledge. And so, guys, you heard where to find her, the Seamless Coach, on all the platforms, especially on Instagram. If you want the free resources, to help your teams today, make sure that you reach out and get in touch with her as well. And so I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. I hope that you got something out of this very rich, very deep conversation so that you can take it back to your office, back to your teams to help prevent and address burnout. And so I would love for you guys to join us again next week here on the Career Climb for another episode, same time and same place. And if you have questions that we didn't get to during the program, please feel free to leave a comment on the show, on the episode. Or, you can go ahead and send either myself or Kelsey a DM. And so I want to just go back through the roll and see the folks who commented: Dan, Kristen, Jason, Christy, Holly, Tara. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And I hope that you have an amazing night.